This is it, y'all. We're at the end. So I was thinking, I was listening to all the panels, yesterday was kind of the doom and gloom day, a little bit. But, and I think we've gotten gradually today a bit more hopeful with each panel as far as the potential goes for seeing brighter ways, more hopeful ways, more preventive ways in the future. I'm hoping this final panel leaves us all with a lot of hope and can help us think a little bit about the beauty that can come out of dealing with some of the most difficult human experiences that have ever happened. And this is ultimately how I got into the field of atrocity prevention, was by looking at the role of civil society actors, activists, and artists, and the incredible influence that they can have on helping the society shape the way they understand difficult pasts, and also depict a vision for what a more bright and hopeful future can be. And I couldn't have asked for three more perfect people to help have this conversation. I'm going to introduce them a little bit, and I've had the opportunity to work with all of them in different capacities. So they're both colleagues and friends, and constant sources of inspiration for me. Immediately to my left is Sahara Gomez, who is an artist, a photographer, and activist. She'll talk more about her work, but Sahara does many, many things. One of her, for me, most inspiring projects is working with the family members of people who have been disappeared. This project started in Mexico, and now I'm sure she'll talk about how this has expanded to several other countries that have experienced forced disappearance. And she works with the families who are seeking answers, seeking truth, and seeking for the remains of their loved ones. She documents those stories by collecting and learning about the recipes and the favorite dishes of those who have been disappeared, and then publishes these incredible recipe books of memory that help to make present these people who have been removed from the lives of their family and removed from public life. It's an incredibly inspirational project, and Sahara spent a semester with us 2 years ago in Binghamton, as she was the recipient of a joint award that the Auschwitz Institute and IGMAP were awarding to artist activists for atrocity prevention. So we're so happy that Sahara is back. Next to her is Puleng Sakalo, who is the Chief Albert Lutuli Research Chair at the University of South Africa. So she's a brilliant academic, but also has found an incredible way of integrating an arts practice into her work on dealing with trauma, sexual and gender-based violence. Puleng and I first met and then worked together on an exhibition that was at the Venice Arts Biennale in 2019, and then moved to the Canadian Museum of Human Rights several years later. Puleng worked with a collective of women in South Africa who used embroidery as a way of telling their story of living life under apartheid. And now that project has extended and is taking new paths, and she'll, I'm sure, talk a lot about those different paths that it takes. And then finally, to the your far right, is Lucas Masuco, who is the director of the Museo de la Memoria in Rosario, the Memory Museum of Rosario in Argentina. Rosario is in a large city in Argentina, and the Memory Museum tells the story of the last military dictatorship in Argentina from 1976 to 1983 that saw the disappearance of some 30,000 Argentinian citizens who were declared to be enemies of the state, who were declared to be subversives, and the far-right military regime disappeared them in an attempt to eliminate that political opposition. The Memory Museum in Rosario is an amazing one because it tells their story and the story of that violence using art objects. So rather than the traditional artifacts that you see in museums, they've chosen art and commissioning art objects as a key way of telling the story of this period of violence in Argentina's history that is very much continuing to have impacts today. First of all, please join me in welcoming our three panelists. 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 Please So maybe just to start, I've given my little, a taste of what the incredible things that these people do. But maybe we can just go down the line and if each of you could just introduce yourselves now in your own words and talk a little bit about how you, through your practice, conceive of art as a tool that you're using for responding to, understanding, or recovering from violence. So how do you want to start? No.
Okay. Let me first thank you for the introduction, for coming here. Thank you for all the work in the ICMAP team, and particularly to Nicole. It's an angel for all of us, so thank you so much. My plan was to start talking about something really formal, the questions and techniques of memory. Let me start with a little story. In my family, I was sorry.
You can take it off the stand.
Okay, okay. Let me start with a little story. In my family, when I was a child, the official story of the family was nothing happened to us during the dictatorship. We have no political implications. We didn't have any problem during the dictatorship. Your father came to work every day. It's an easy. My mother said, me too. Nothing. I understood the dictatorship after, during democracy. Eventually, someday I grew up and decided to study political science. So I said to my mother, I will study political science in Rosario. I'm from a little city in the west of Rosario. And then she said, oh, like my cousin. Which cousin? I said, the one that was killed by the dictatorship. What? I said, with my 18 years old and my nerdy tendencies to grasp history in Argentina, then I understood the kind of question that I have inside me about the dictatorship. It wasn't something magical, but I mean, I need to ask more about this history. And I found a place to make these questions, to make more questions that the answers that I received. And that place was the museum, the Memory Museum in Rosario. Then in this place, I learned that you can make history from memory, from art, particularly, and not being horrorized by this history, this part of this heavy part of our history. You don't need to be in this place and pretend to be moved. You know, maybe that happened to you in the past, but you enter a memory site and automatically, I will write like this, automatically you came back. Okay, I need to be warm. I need to feel the sorrow of the disappear of the. That's not needed. Right? I'm saying like as an old worker of this place, you don't need to pretend to be moved. You need to make questions. That's the invitation of the Memory Museum, and that's why we do it from the art. We decided to not fill the rooms with photographs and timelines and data. You have the data. We want to make more questions, and we need from you, that's what we said to the visitors, make us questions. And go back to your place, go back to your city, and came back with more questions. And come back to argue with us. We need this kind of exchange. I mean, we are in a pretty hard situation in Argentina, you might know that. The vindication of the dictatorship has won elections, free elections, with no questions about the validity of these elections. People are voting for this kind of policies, these memory policies, because they are memory policies too, against the memory of the victims, of the relatives of the victims, of the survivors, etc., etc. And I think that one of the main mistakes that we made from 2003 until 2023 was to forget that common people can do extraordinary things. Common people can do horrible things too. And art and representation, at least in our museum, try to put that in the center of the debate. The witnesses of the dictatorship, like my mother, who visited the museum recently, 2 weeks ago, for the first time, and she said, "Where is the picture of Eduardo?" Eduardo is his cousin, my uncle. And we walk around to find the name of Eduardo in one of the installations that we have. She's a really tough person. She cried for the very first time, and I was witness of that. And it wasn't pretend. He really felt. He was a kid. She said to me, he was like 22 years old. Only that. What I want to say, and we can continue, is that the main questions that the museum work with is how you represent the absence of the loved ones, how you can bring the past to the present without using the horror and the lecture from one generation to another as a tool, and how you put words to the unspeakable. You don't need a class of history in the museum. You have educational system for that. In the museum, we need to touch a different part of your soul. And that's what we believe that art can produce. Sorry for more about my life.
Thank you, Lucas, and hi everyone. I'm also so grateful and honored to be here today. I'd like to start to say a little bit about the research chair that I run. I'm not sure how many in this room know who Albert Luthuli is or was, but he was one of the liberation struggle heroes in South Africa. And so this unit that I run, or that I head, aims to really do work that centers on social justice in alignment with his philosophy, his ethos, and what he stood for as a liberation struggle hero. And I mention him because I think also just being in this context is also very relevant, because he was actually very good friends and aligned very much with Martin Luther King. And because of the ban in South Africa, they never got to meet in person, but they did write letters to each other. They were very much aligned in how they were looking at fighting for civil rights, fighting for the right to be treated as human beings, but doing so in a peaceful way. So at the core of what they did, and I think as we seek for a world that is centering peace and justice, it's important to look at these connections. He was the first African to be awarded the Nobel Prize in 1961, and Martin Luther then got it in 1964. And in his speech, he even acknowledged Albert Luthuli. And so that's how I think aligned they were in terms of their focus and the work that they did. So at the core of the kind of questions and issues that are raised in my work is around issues of social justice. How can we imagine social justice in context and in spaces that continue to be unequal? In South Africa, we had 1994, where we gained our independence. But even after that, in terms of the challenges that we're still confronted with as a country, there's still a lot of questions that we're sitting with. Albert Luthuli died in 1967. And when he died, he was hit by a train, and it was deemed to be an accident, so he died, and that was that. But there were always questions around what really happened to him. And so there was an inquest that went on, and only last year in South Africa, there was a court case that sat, and there were witnesses and evidence, and finally, it was declared that actually he was killed by the apartheid state. After so many years, he died in 1967. In 2025, only then was it officially acknowledged that he was actually killed by the state. And so we had our transition as a country, and we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that's why I was so excited with the session this morning. And part of that was because, and I liked what Zaira said in the morning about whose narrative counts or whose story counts, and how important it is that all the victims' stories need to be heard. And with the TRC, while much work was done, one of the things that wasn't really paid attention to was the everyday struggles that people experience, the everyday suffering that people experience. It was very clear that the focus is going to be on gross human violations. And now the question is, what happens to the everyday suffering that people experience? What happens to the traumas of people in the communities, in the families, the women, the children, the people who disappeared? What happens to those? And so that's where my work comes in terms of saying, what do we do with these traumas? I come from the discipline of psychology, and often we look at trauma very differently. And so I wanted to move away from that individualization of trauma, understanding how communities suffer. And so that's how I moved to using the arts as a tool, a powerful tool, I believe, in assisting us to attend to the unspeakable atrocities that people encountered, how many women did not really willingly or could not speak about what happened to them while they were in detention, while they were held by the police, how they were raped by the police. For some, the evidence became very evident that when they came home, and then later, months later, they had children, and it was very obvious what happened to them. But these are some of the traumas and the stigmas that are in our communities that many people do not get to speak about. And for me, the power of the arts then comes in. Something that Charlie said on Monday, that the silences that are there in our communities, in our families, what happens to those silences? They get passed on from one generation to the next. So the arts comes in assisting us to be able to express that which we cannot put into words, the embodied traumas that people have. So through making embroideries with collectives in the community, it offers that opportunity to be able to carve and draw and with needle and thread, be able to visually depict some of the atrocities that often are very difficult to depict in words. And I think I'll just pause here for now as an introduction. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for having me, Max and Carrie. I'm very impressed and very happy to be here and share with you. So I just want to share how I arrived to the Recetario para la Memoria as a documentary photographer. So I used to work with disappearance and forensic teams, and went to the field with collectives who are looking for the lost one, and this kind of stuff, and mass graves and all these narratives. And at one moment, I think 10 years ago, they invited me to the Museo de la Imagen in Mexico City. And for me, it was a huge moment because I understood one image is not enough in face of the forensic crisis who Mexico lives. So now Mexico have more than 130,000 disappeared. Most of them since 2006. So we are not working on a past subject, but in a present subject. So la urgencia, the urgency is not the same. The families are there and they are looking for them each day. So yeah, I start to ask me who are looking these images, who do I make these images for, and what is the purpose of these images. So I start to change my practice, and I start to dialogue with one of the collective, Las Rastreadoras del Fuerte in Sinaloa. like how we can do something to invite people to be part of that, who no one want to be part of that, because it's really sad and it's really hard to see. So one of the questions is how we can talk from life and not from death. I think that was one of the questions. And one of the points in common was everybody can cook. It's not a good cooking, it's not a problem, it's okay. But in this recipe, you can have all the love of someone and all the intimacy you can share with someone. So I invited them to cook the preferred dish of their loved ones. And I opened a magic box, I think, because it's something like huge. A lot of them never cooked again this recipe. I didn't know at the time. So it was, oh, okay, so that's more than art, or it's another thing, or what happened here? So we did this first book. They share the recipes, I take the pictures of each one, and we did this book. And after that, another collective contacted me, like, we want a book too. So I went to Guanajuato and we made this second book with 70 women and 10 collectives. And the project began to be more and more collaborative, because if not, it's not possible. And after that, collective in Colombia contact me, and we start to find a way to bring the project there. And we did the book in Colombia last year. And now we are working in El Salvador and Peru. So it's something like the picture, because I'm a photographer, is the starting point to a lot of things, like to cook again, to make a book, to make an exhibition, to make cook session with civil society, to talk about disappearance in another ways, and to learn the preferred dish of Eduardo. And I learned how to cook flan pudding. I love pudding. And the recipe I learned to make pudding is the Eduardo's one. So that make, I don't know, like a lot of connection. And one of the most important things right now is this cook session with civil society. And it's just that moves the idea of the victim, and we cook together and we eat together, of course, and we talk about the disappearment in life, like what he likes. So we have this exercise to talk in present every time, and to assume if you don't have a body, we don't speak in past. So now I think there is 200 families who are participating in the project. And in Colombia last year, women from Mexico came, and women from Colombia who are participating in the project was here. So there is a big connection, and it's very moving last time. And I want just to be clear, it's a project who's sustained in collectivity every time. So the start, it's always the same. It's a kitchen, and it's me alone or not, depends. And from there, that open. So the people who write in the book, because it's a recipes, but now we invite journalists to write in the book and to share their experiences. So it's a lot of people, in fact, at the end. And the big knowledge of what I learned once and again, it's no one saves themselves alone. And this project represents that.
This panel is like one of those moments where I really hate that we have a ban on any projections, because I wish you could see some images of the beautiful art that all of these people engage with. And I highly encourage you to go online and search so you can get a sense of what we're talking about here. Because in addition to it being incredibly meaningful, it's also really beautiful. One of the challenges we often face in the atrocity prevention community is there's an illusion that so many people have that there's supposed to be like one thing that we do, one policy or one program, and that thing has to single-handedly prevent violence from happening, and that's what prevention has to look like. It's a silver bullet. It's this single cure. And of course, it's much more complicated than that. And I don't think any of us would say that a work of art on its own can single-handedly prevent or is enough to respond to all of that violence. But that said, I would love to hear what you think about what are the ways that art in particular, the special ways that art can contribute to that larger project of dealing with this violence, understanding this violence, and also what are its limits? What can't it do and what shouldn't we expect it to do?
Let me start with the limits. There are extreme characteristics of these experiences, of a genocide, of a mass killing, of being kidnapped, of being disappeared, of having one relative, one son or daughter disappeared, that art and mediation and nothing can transmit that. But what we can do from art is talk about life instead of death, or only the death of our loved ones, and create this space of dialogue between generations, avoiding this characteristic situation in which the old generation teaches the new one how it has to be done. Let me tell you how it was in my time. You have to do it in the same way because you are distracted with cell phones or you don't have any kind of agenda for the future. And we were compiled for in the political sense. We have ideology. You don't have ideology. In the museum in Rosario, we try to break that tendency. We understand. We believe that the new generations has much to teach to the old generations. We have 43 years of democracy in Argentina. So I might maybe 90% of the people who visit the museum in Rosario has born in democracy and has no idea how it is to live under a dictatorship, under a state of violence. I mean, they don't understand the word disappear. They ask us, what do you mean we disappear? Literally, it doesn't show in your house again. Your brother, your mother, your father, you don't know where he is. But come on, the body, you know where is the body. No, we don't know. And you can be half a century looking for him. Well, actually, what's happening in Argentina is still today. But this new generation has much to say about democracy. All the things that democracy has not made for them. So we need to learn about their fears, about their anxieties, about their dreams. And art can enable that, talking about life, not only about death. For one example is a series of books, little books, that we make in the museum called Déjame que te cuente, Let Me Tell You, in which families, relatives from the disappearance of Rosario, talks about the history of these people, of these persons, but from the moment they were born. You know, what the dishes that they like, the sports that they like, the first girlfriend or the first boyfriend, and how that trajectory puts them in the position of, okay, I will be part of some kind of organization trying to make a change in society. And again, we have this kind of reading tables from the relatives reading the book created from their own testimony with the public schools in the city. And from there, we start some kind of dialogue. They start to ask the new generations, start to ask how it was to be a young person in the 70s, but after that, they try to teach how it is to be a young person in the 21st century. And that kind of dialogue is enabled by we try to enable that kind of dialogue from art, contemporary art, basically.
I think the coming together, I think for me also the collective that you were talking about, doing this work, remembering in community, engaging together, offers an amazing opportunity, I think, for people who've been sitting on their own with their trauma, with their loss, and being in a space where they can engage with others, also who in a way get it, who understand what they've been going through. And so that for me, I think, offers the potential for reimagining a different future together. And I think what art does, like the visual narrative or visual storytelling, in this way, in these contexts, also offers an opportunity for healing as well. Because I think when that internal suffering and trauma that people feel, when getting an opportunity to be able to express it creatively like this, does something to one. But also what's very profound about the arts as potential, I think, for transformation is offering that opportunity for dialogue. We were talking about restorative justice and looking in particular at the Colombian context. And as part of the work that we've been doing with the embroideries, with the collective of women, we had the opportunity to work through the Embassy of Colombia with the women who are doing similar work in Colombia, the weavers of Mampohan. So they also do work and focusing specifically on what has happened in Colombia. We know the peace accord, and last year they came to South Africa, the women, and together with the women that we work with in South Africa, we sat together and actually created work together as a collective in reflecting back, in remembering the atrocities of this past, but in saying what does the idea of never again, of this experience, what would that look like and what would that mean? And what are the potentials also for forgiveness so that we're able to move forward? And that for me, I think was very powerful. And I hear when you say sometimes it's not about the horror, but I'd like to say sometimes it is about the horror, because I think through the artwork, one gets to see the horrors, actually, of the violence that has been perpetuated against people. So we actually weave that in and put it in the artwork so that it offers a moment of contemplation, a moment of reflection, that as you look at the artwork and you actually look and you see somebody being hanged, somebody being burnt alive, what does that do to you, right? And what does that mean in terms of saying, what world can we imagine going forward with these atrocities and people and lives being lost? How is it that we can look at this, and what kind of work needs to be done to ensure that as we move forward, we do not experience this kind of atrocity again. At least that's the hope and the intention, that let's look at this horror in the face and say, what does this say to us? What does this mean to us? And how can we imagine a different future? And I think this is something that would not be possible, bringing two groups of women, and I'm talking about elderly women, you know, again, that idea that if people don't speak about their stories or share what has happened to them, and they die with those stories, with those narratives, and again, that idea that the pain and the suffering and the trauma does not die with the people, it actually gets passed on into the next generation, and they do not have the vocabulary for it. And when we don't create those spaces for engagement, what happens? And I think the arts offers that opportunity in terms of looking at what is possible. And then limitations, of course, because who's going to be looking at the work? Is it going to lead to any change? But I think it's a starting point, right? Is it enough? Probably not. But I think it's a very important starting point.
Thank you. So yeah, I jump into ideas you share. I think about the reimagining, and I feel as artists or communicators in every way, part of our job is invent and reinvent and looking for narratives who can hold people to be part. So we need to be clear about the narratives have a period of life, and in some point that doesn't work. And it's okay, it's not a problem, but so our work is just looking for others, because there is a lot of works about memory, and these works used to work in one moment. So that's, for me, it's the work of art. It's just reimagining and invent and looking for, and sometimes that works and sometimes doesn't work, but it's looking for. And the other, and I think it's more or less what are you talking about, it's like find format, or the art make us see what we don't want to look at. And that is the really power of the art. It's like, I can show you something you don't want to see, but I can show you that. So,
Yeah, go ahead. One idea. We talk about horror in the museum, obviously, we do it. But we understand that there is a danger of some kind of backlash if we only talk about the horror, if we only talk about the torture, if we only talk about the rapes and the kidnapping of babies, and etc. And that the danger of the backlash is to create some kind of blockade in the reflection and the ideas. And actually, we are seeing it today in the museum. The coming back of the question this happened to these people, what they did to deserve this kind of treatment, you know? Algo habrán hecho, something they might have done to receive this kind of treatment. And the other one, the other phenomenon that is happening is, yes, in the museum with the new generation, is to this kind of fear of imagining new or different futures, or imagine some kind of collective actions to change society, because that can happen to you too. So that's the kind of danger when you only use horror to touch people, minds and souls. That's why we try to do it with the same material, photographs and narratives and stories and etc. But from using art as a tool to transform that kind of experiences. Otherwise, you might have this tendency to some kind of compulsive repetition of slogans and names and cases and dates and years and phrases that you have to say because you are in the Museum of Memory. You can't say something outside the script of the good visitor of the museum. It's something like what I like to I really like Pink Floyd. The Wall, what I call the teacher model of Pink Floyd in the Memory Museum. How can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? You have to say these kind of phrases because you are in the Memory Museum. No, you can ask whatever you want from the Memory Museum. We'll send you with more questions maybe, but you can ask. And that's what we do.
I'm struck by Boulain and Sahara, you both talk about these kind of transnational collaborations, bringing together groups of people, predominantly women in both of your cases, right? Who are sharing histories of violence or who have separate experiences of trauma, and there's this coming together that's happening. In some cases, there can actually be a lot of tension that emerges when comparisons are made between victim communities. There can be this kind of competitive victimhood that arises, saying like, what I experienced was different than you or worse than you in some way. But it sounds like that's not something that's you're experiencing. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about how the communities are coming together, speaking to each other, and how they understand the similarities, but also the differences between their experiences.
So what is interesting, I think in South Africa we have a place called Constitution Hill. It's a museum now, but it used to be a women's prison during apartheid. So many of the famous names that one would know of the women liberation struggle heroines would have been detained there. And this is where we met, right? Also because it was very symbolic in bringing that past and that history together into the moment of saying, how do we together imagine and think about peace? And I think that there was no tension. Instead, I think there was this understanding of the reality of suffering and what that means and how that has affected the women. And so it was the work of art where we actually exhibited the work together. So the work from South Africa and the work from Colombia, that was already done. And then we had dialogues where we had conversations around the actual experiences of the women themselves. And it was amazing to actually see the formation of like a camaraderie of sorts in that moment. And I think there's power in creating more of these spaces, because we followed that on with the coming days with workshops where it was not just the individual work pieces that were already done, but we created a space for co-creation where they actually imagined and created work of saying what kind of narratives or stories can we bring together in this particular moment. And this is where I think, again, what I was talking about earlier on the limits of language or how language sometimes can be insufficient. These were women who were speaking the indigenous South African languages and women who were speaking Spanish. And being in the space and being in conversation with each other and creating together. Of course, for the dialogues, we had interpreters, but sitting in that moment and going beyond the language barriers and thinking about what does creating a peaceful world in their own understanding means and what might that look like. So patching that together with pieces of cloth and engaging with each other, I think was such a powerful moment. And I think that there is potential and possibilities there when people come together that way to imagine a future, even from like different continents, even as we think about the global world where there's justice and peace. I think these are some of the nuggets and possibilities that are there that can arise.
Okay. In fact, I think, for example, in Mexico, and I think it's in every place. In Mexico, we have now more than 100 women collectives who are looking for the loved one, and usually the collectives struggle, and now they are friends, and now we know, and now we talk, and now. And of course, the power and the state take advantage of that. So, for example, in the second book, in Guanajuato, we start to invite people and not collectives. And I think that changed the way, because it's not the project of the collective, it's the project of the people who are involved in. And these people are from 20 collectives or 14 collectives or different. So that was one of the way. And the other for now, the only real exchange we had is between Sinaloa, Guanajuato, and Colombia. And for example, I think Colombia for Mexican was a really, we look at Colombia as an example of transitional justice. So it's more like what we can learn from you. And at the same time, in Mexico, the women are looking in the field, and in Colombia, no. But they have another kind of structure. So they share their own expertise, who are not the same. And that's like, it's not on me, it's like just they talk and they exchange about that. And I know they want to make an exchange, because in Colombia they did these portraits in little girls, beautiful, and now the Mexican want to do that too. So they are looking to find a way to bring the person who knows to do that in Colombia to learn the Mexican to do these portraits of the loved one. So.
Before I want to open it up to questions from the audience, but before that, because we don't have PowerPoint presentations and because you can't see the images, I was wondering if each of you could just talk about one piece of art that you've been engaged with that's in the museum, that you've worked with Pulain, that you've created with this collective Sahara, that particularly has resonated with you, or you think about often, or that has had a particular impact on you or other audiences when you're thinking about this work? I know that's a big question to ask, the big one.
I start. I just, from the memory receipt book, one museum invited me to do some activation with public, like talk about that, and I wanted absolutely work with kids. So at the end, from the memory receipt book, I wrote a children play who are now in the public school, and who, it's another piece of, it's not in a museum, you don't live in a museum, it's a really small format, but that open the dialogue with small one, with really small kids about disappearance. And the kids start to write letters to the woman who are searcher. So
okay. There's so many rooms or installations in the museum to recreate, but I will go with the puzzle that we used to talk about the kids and the children's kidnapped by the dictatorship, and the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo they are still looking for. Why I'm going for that? Because the place is perfect to take the example of how is built the room. Roberto Puzzolo is a photographer in Rosario, a visual artist in Rosario. So when when the museum started to work on this project of design the permanent exhibition in 2010, he said, I want to create a puzzle. I want to create a game for the people. But what kind of scale? The question from us was that. What scale of game you want to? A whole room. So he created a puzzle, two puzzles actually. One, you can imagine in my left, an incomplete puzzle with the images of the kids and the daughters and sons from the disappeared that we don't know where they are. Still, we don't know where they are, and the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo are looking for them. And in my right, another puzzle, another incomplete puzzle that we hope someday we can complete, with the faces of the stories that abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, achieved to reconstruct, to the identities that they restore. That's the correct word. And we have almost 300 pieces of that puzzle in my left, and we have more than 140 pieces of that puzzle in my right. And every 10th of December, and which is the day of International Day of Human Rights, but also the anniversary of the recovery of democracy in Argentina, we took the pieces that year, they recovered their identity. We took it from this wall and we put it in that wall, hoping someday to complete that puzzle in my right. You can find, you can search for this space. The name of the room is Evidencias. You can look for it. Norberto Puzzolo, Museo de la Memoria, Rosario, Memory Museum Rosario, Norberto Puzzolo, and you will see something much better than my words can describe.
Yeah, I think it's a trick to try and create this picture for you to imagine. But I think one of the things that the apartheid regime did was to really disintegrate families. And it's something that still lingers today, I think, in our society in terms of how families were separated and the fabric of just the society and the core of it was disintegrated. And we continue to experience a lot of challenges today as a result of that. And so the image that comes to my mind is one of the embroideries that was made by one of the women who was showing exactly that, depicting that. And this idea of embodied pain and being unable to express the pain comes out so beautifully in this, because she shows how when the mother and father were separated, and as the children, they could not visit because there were these, I don't know, it was a strange thing. There were these borders within the same country. There were other little countries. I don't even know how to explain it, but yeah. South Africa, it's got a very complicated past. And so with this embroidery, it just depicts the amount of pain that the children felt as a result of the separation. And there's an image of the heart that is breaking when you think about a broken heart. And so the heart is actually outside of the body. So you see the heart outside of the body open and then like blood spread. So it's a very powerful image that aims at showing the depth of the pain and the loss as a result of the family disintegration. So that's one of the images that really stands out for me.
Thanks. I'm going to open it up for questions, thoughts. Miriam?
Thank you guys so much for talking and sharing your stories. It's been really moving. My question, Zahra, you talked about the children's play, and it made me think of this, is atrocities and war and violence doesn't discriminate by age, right? It affects everyone regardless of age. But often I think in, the West or in societies where we aren't facing active conflict or violence, there's this aversion to, children or the elderly consuming distressing content. There's often like age limits put on the consumption of art and media and literature. And so I guess I'm just curious what your guys' opinions on that are. Should media have an age limit or not? I think all of us in this room have opinions about the importance of education and the tools used for that, and everyone in society should be aware of these things. But yeah, I hope that sort of made sense.
In our case, that was some debate, what we do with children in the museum. Actually, before I was the director of the museum, we didn't have any kind of program for children in the museum. Imagine that we will traumatize them. We talk about this with kids from 11 years. But we start to talk about with them, and not simplifying the history. Or okay, I'm going to tell you a little history in Argentina. No. We talk about rights. You have right to play with your friends. You have right to have a healthy environment in your house and in your school. You have rights. And there was a time in Argentina where you didn't have this kind of rights, and we live there. We hope someday you come back with more age, with more experience, with more knowledge from school, and then we can talk about that in the future. Go to your home, talk to your family, ask to your mother, to your father, to your brothers, what they know about this what they know about the abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, what they know about the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, what they know about Rosario during the dictatorship. But simple, trying to avoid this, also a backlash of traumatize a little kid with torture and etc.
Okay, that's a good question, because that's work, if you think about the past violence. In Mexico case, it's present. So in fact, they are living that all the time. So maybe you have this kind of stuff to stigmatize the disappeared or the person who are victim of the violence, like someone like Algo Hecho. How do you say that?
He might dance.
Okay, so maybe the work is to break this stigmatize, but they leave the violence, in fact. There is not a difference.
I can add one thing, that the process to embrace children in the museum or in creating programs for children in the museum wasn't easy. It was a few years of debate, internal debate, and actually thanks to Auschwitz Institute, we have this kind of debates in 2023, 2024, and 2025. This year is the first year a stable program. A stable program for kindergarten and primary schools.
I think in the age where we're living under regimes that are trying as much as possible to make sure that history lessons and the teaching of history is pushed out, or only certain types of history is taught. I think other ways of telling the stories are even more important now more than ever. And so it's important to create age-appropriate kind of work. And in my case, part of what we're starting to do is also incorporate the performance arts. So we do theater production with young people. So because it is important to still tell the stories, the histories, and to share these narratives, but obviously not do them in a way that's going to be traumatizing. So finding ways that are going to assist in telling the stories, but in a way that allows for children not to be traumatized. But it's important to tell them.
Thank you very much. I'm actually struck by the way the work, guys, that you are doing. And my question would be, because I'm from South Africa, would be specifically directed to Buleng. Firstly, I want to know which social category of women that you are dealing with. And the reason why I ask this question is because there are elderly women who died with trauma. For example, while we were commemorating the 1976 event, the uprising, Soweto uprising that took place in Soweto, working as a cultural officer, I was called by Mrs. Makubu, the mother of the student who's carrying, in the popular image, a student who is carrying Hector Peterson, the first victim of that uprising. And she said, Vusi, I was with the architect of Phil. She said, Vusi and Phil, I can see you guys, you're busy commemorating Hector Peterson, but you forget about my son, who was saving the life of this young man and who actually disappeared, because even now, nobody knows where Vusi Makubu is, whether he died or he's still alive, because people who saw him, they said, in Canada, they saw him, he was kind of insane. Some they said disappeared in Nigeria. So that woman, she actually died with anger and trauma. So what we had to do with Phil Mashaba, we bought a granite, because in that nothing was said about Makubu. It focused more on Hector Peterson. So what we had to do, we bought a granite and we inscribed, some inscription that commemorates Makubu. So that in itself, it urges me to ask the social category of women that you are dealing with, and what kind of trauma, whether they lost their husbands or some of them were tortured. Yeah, that's my question. And the second one, the quick one. Okay, the quick one. It's, have you considered dealing with the ex-combatants who suffered in camps? Thank you.
Should I answer?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So thank you so much for your questions, and I think it's a very important question, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the focus on the gross human violations, the same as focusing on the well-known people or names and who attention is given to. And with the work that I've been doing, it's been very intentional in looking at the actual everyday struggles and suffering, as I was saying, so those that would often not be given attention. So these are Abo Mama, women in the communities who grew up during apartheid and experienced those atrocities under apartheid. So it's your everyday women, but elderly women, and it's precisely for that idea that the idea or the hope is to give space for those stories, but also so that they do not die without having shared their stories. And then with the second question, absolutely. We are working with the ex-combatants from all the different Azapo, MK, all of them. Actually, there'll be a book that's hopefully going to be published by UKZN before the end of this year. So we've been working with them as well because we understand the importance and the traumas of what they've experienced while they were underground. Thank you.
Thank you for all your presentations. They are all very inspiring. So first of all, thank you very much for sharing. And I was wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about other experiences of other people using also the arts as a way to rewrite history, because as every memory initiative, the arts also can be used in different ways to present different interpretations of what happened. And also, some of the people who want to present different narratives sometimes getting in positions of power. So how to better deal with that pressure if you ever felt that kind of pressure from public officials or from other organizations or from other artists who are presenting different narratives of what happened. So if you guys wanna or can share a little bit about how do you see that, and if you are also facing those narratives and some tension between the artist community working in this field.
Okay. One of the point of the project, or one of the rules, it's not a rule, but it's life. We are autofinanciadas, and I think it's the only way to just give the voice to the participants. And one thing we are all agree in the team, it's like each one who want to participate have their own narrative, and it's perfect. So there is no, there is no dialogue with any force, and sometimes when we are invited to different places, or la Feria del Libro de Guanajuato, for example, because it's the present, and there is a very, again, in Mexico, in 90% of the disappearance, sorry, I cannot speak English anymore, un policía o una persona, ¿no? Está involucrada.
A policeman or a police officer was involved.
Yeah. So we don't work with the state. And in some moments when we need to take a decision, it's the participants who take the decision, not us. Like if they want to go to TV Azteca, for example, they go. It's their project. So yeah, they choose where they want to go with.
In the case of Argentina, the organizations that are vindicating the dictatorship, or they are the annihilist of the dictatorship, and the numbers of disappeared and the magnitude of the genocide, they are not doing yet. Yes, they are not doing art with their narratives. They are copying the strategies of the human rights movement. That's right, that's happening. But now they are not copying our strategy in the museum. I don't know why. I don't want to ask, maybe. They are too brutal to do it, maybe, I don't know. But we still have, with the human rights movement, with the relatives, debates about art and representation in the museum. Some of them are there still looking to our work, saying, you are making my son, my brother, my sister a piece of art. He wasn't that. He was a political activist. he wants social change. He wanted to talk about economics and culture and education and social injustice. You are not doing that. You're making him a product of the system. It's an absolute valid point. We think we are not doing that, obviously. But the argue is with some of them, the most of them are with us. Well, in this strategy are part of the museum, etc., etc. But we have argues about art and representation, but mostly with the relatives and human rights organization, because we have the same goal. That's the key question of this.
Just quickly, this idea of using art to rewrite history, I think is very important. I think there's been a lot of misrepresentation of people's histories, and through art, one also has the potential to do that. But your point is also very important around what happens, like with the government or the state and influence in terms of determining. And a good example is a recent case in South Africa where one of the artists was selected to go and showcase her work in the Venice Biennale. So on behalf of South Africa, representing the country. And unfortunately, she was not allowed to go there by the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, where the arts falls under, because he felt that her artwork was highly decisive. This is artwork that was focusing on femicide and colonial history, but she was also infusing and paying tribute to a Palestinian poet and just talking about the violence in Gaza and linking that to women and gender-based violence and how women are suffering in that context. She was not given permission to go. She tried to fight it and did an appeal, and the High Court rejected her appeal. So you make a very good point. That is the power of the arts, actually, that it can lead to that. Very disappointing. But yeah, that's the reality.
I'm going to collect a few questions because we're low on time.
Thank you so much for your work, and pulling your statement actually gives life to my question, which is arts sometimes can be unsettling, or narratives particularly perpetuated by the powerful in the society. And my question to you all is, have you faced any threats based on the work that you have done? And if so, what have you done to protect yourselves, or what can artists actually do?
I'm gonna collect a few.
Thank you. Thank you for that question also, Sela, because that would have been my second question. But the first one is directed to Pudeng. I first want to thank all of you for the great work you do. I'm a strong believer in using art to frame narrative. So having said that, recently I met Dr. Amphile, who spoke glowingly about the work being done in South Africa. And I was just wondering, you spoke about the collaboration with Colombia. So I was wondering if there is any plan to collaborate with other African countries. I want to bring the case of Burundi. I was there a year ago researching about the 1972 atrocity. And I met with participants who literally thanked me and the other researchers for asking them these questions, because that seemed to be like the first time they could actually speak about what happened to them. So I was wondering if you are thinking about, taking your work and collaborating with other African countries who have been through this issue of silence for centuries, for decades. Thank you.
And one last one.
Yeah, thank you very much for the nice work you all are doing. I just have a question. What role do music play in complementing your work? And have you considered actually working with musicians in your future projects? Thank you.
Anyone? Yeah, please.
The last March, 24th of March, was the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the dictatorship. So we decided to have an agenda for the whole week of that commemoration. One activity was to have music in the museum, the music of from the democracy, talking about the dictatorship, not the songs that suffered censorship from the dictatorship, but the music that was created during democracy to talk about kidnapping or the injustice of the impunity during the 90s, and et cetera, et cetera. So music, poetry, all kind of arts of cultural expressions are part of the programming in the museum. We try to use every language that we can use to create these bridges between past and present. And every musician of that event was born in democracy. That was one condition of the program.
Have I been threatened as a result of the work? Thankfully not. I would say not yet. I hope it stays that way. And working with African countries, so far the only country that I've engaged with is Rwanda, I think for obvious reasons. But the work that we did was actually collaborating with an already existing project. And I think this is where also maybe music also comes in, because it's a drumming group, bringing the Hutu and the Tutsi women together as a form of reconciliation, imagining together. And that was also a very powerful way of thinking about moving forward together as a collective, intergenerational group of women, and very intentional in using drumming, which historically has been, particularly in Rwanda, reserved as something that men do and not women. And so using that as a way to be able to think outside of the prescripts of society was very interesting, but also bringing people with such a complicated history together to say, let's reimagine reconciliation together. I thought was very powerful. They're called Ingoma Nyasha. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, in case anybody would like to have a look at it. But in terms of other countries, not yet. It's still in the conceptualization space, if you will, with colleagues in Ghana as well. Just thinking about how possible collaborations could be. And a colleague actually from Burundi, but who's currently in South Africa and making those connections. So yeah, in terms of music, no, only started using music with the theater performance with the young people. So that's when music has been coming in, but not with the artistic work that I've done thus far.
Thank you for the question. I already did a small exercise with music with one collective in Nuevo León. It's another part of Mexico, who already know about the memory receipt book, but they didn't want to work in this way. So we start to talk, and at the end we made these, again, the name is Cancionero para no olvidar. I don't know how you say that in English.
Songs in order to not forget.
Thank you. And so we work with families who share their testimonies, and we work with an actress who record these testimonies. And at the same time, we have this playlist in Spotify before Spotify was evil. And we have the testimony and the music, and the testimony and the music. And it was really very strong, the presentation of the project, because we dance. So it's like, yeah, it's another way to remember or to make memory. And to answer to the question, Stella, yes, but it's the same thing. It's when you work in the present, it's very common. So we used to work with Artículo 19, who work with safety for the journalists, but I really don't think that serves to anything, but yeah.
So we're going to bring this panel to an end a little early because we have a few closing things to do, but please join me in thanking our music.